Hey, Encounter. Glad to see you on this Monday night. I wish that we were in Capon Auditorium, but that is not the way things are to be right now. So wherever this is landing, I know that some of you are sitting in your living rooms at home. Some of you are still in your apartments here in town. We're going to continue this rhythm of being together on Monday nights, though, and I'm excited about that. A couple of announcements before I get into stuff tonight. One would be that we're having a time of campus-wide prayer. If you're watching this live, that would be tomorrow, Tuesday night from 7 to 8 p.m. And that's something that all of the campus ministries are doing. All of them are. So us and Crew and Merge and InterVarsity and Cornerstone and all the rest, like all the rest of us, we're all going to join together in a time of dedicated prayer between 7 and 8 p.m. on Tuesday night. The administration knows that we're praying for him. Dr. Dietz knows that you'll be praying for him tomorrow night. And so would ask that we're going to be doing some creative stuff with that, but feel free to post prayers on social media. Feel free to set that time aside. Feel free to call each other, do Zoom calls with each other and pray during that season. Another way we're going to be doing prayer together, let me make sure I get this right. Every day on our Instagram story, you can submit a prayer request every day. And on Wednesdays, the Adore service team then is going to release like a prayer wall so you can be praying for each other. I'm told you can even submit those anonymously every day on our Insta story. So please do that because we want to be a people of prayer. That's something that we can do while we're scattered. Okay. And in this season, I want to encourage you this way too. You're supposed to be physically distanced, but that doesn't mean that you have to be socially distanced. I know that's the term everybody's using. But we shouldn't be socially distanced during this time. You can still connect with each other. And life doesn't look the same right now that it used to look, right? Everything's been reshaped. And that means your old rhythms won't work either. Your old rhythms are going to need to be reshaped. And so I'm going to encourage you to do that. My life is being reshaped right now. Be open to let God reshape what your day looks like. It's worth the effort. Our small groups are back up and meeting. We need to be in each other's lives. So let me encourage you, if you've never had a small group before, let us know and we'll get connected with one of those that's virtually happening. Use the tools. I mean, you guys are doing Zoom, I'm sure, and other stuff for classes. Use those tools to be in each other's lives still. You need it right now. New rhythms of prayer, new rhythms of being in the Word, not falling into temptations of pornography, not wasting the moments that you've been given right now. We need to steward our time well. It would be easy to waste it in this season. So I want you to be able to have the spaces where you can ask each other those questions, where you can check in on each other and know how each other are doing. Let's stay together. Let's stay connected with each other during this season. So before I get to my text tonight, I want to play a short little game with you. I've got my cards ready here. And this is a trivia game about our staff. And so if you are watching this live, this is especially for you because I'm hoping that you'll be able to write in your answer right now in real time. And I'm not going to give you much time to do that. So you're going to have to be ready very quickly. You ready? So here's the question. The first question. Be ready to type your answer. Number one. You need to give me the name of a staff person, staff or interns together. Okay, this is a trivia game about them. Which staff person went through a phase where they were really into gymnastics? And go. I'll give you 2 or 3 seconds here to type out your answer. 3, 2, 1. All right, I'm going to give you partial credit if you answered Haley, but the correct answer is Dustin. That's right, Dustin. All right, question number 2. Which staff person, staff or interns, went through a phase of wearing skinny jeans? 3 seconds, 2, 1. All right, I'm going to give you partial credit if you answered Phil, because, I think that's funny. But the real answer is Dustin. Dustin, skinny jeans, it's true. I love you, Dustin. All right, question number 3. Which staff person went through a phase of axe throwing and also magic? Give you 2 or 3 seconds. All right, the correct answer, well, first of all, if you answered Molly Beal, you lose all of your points because that would be ridiculous. But the correct answer is Dustin. That's correct. The answer to question 3 is Dustin. And question number 4. Which staff person went through a phase of having a really questionable haircut? 3 seconds on the board. And partial credit if you answered me, because I've had some questionable haircuts in my time, but the real answer is definitely Matt. And if you're looking for proof, yeah, questionable. I love you, Matt and Dustin. All right, so here's the deal. All spring, we have been walking through this series called Reframed. These are texts where Jesus either quotes or he refers to the Old Testament. And so in their context, what Jesus is doing, the reason why we're calling it Reframed is because these people walk in with these misconceptions of who God is or what he has said. And so Jesus goes back and cites the Old Testament and often reframes their understanding or perception of who God is. Tonight, Jesus quotes from Ezekiel and Jeremiah. Those are our two texts, but it's coming out of Mark 8. That's where, and tonight our text is about food as well. And this should interest you because if you're like me, I'm going to hit May 1st weighing about 100 pounds more than I did at the beginning. In our context, it is super easy to eat right now when you're bored, and I'm fighting that as much as anybody. So let me give you a good food reminder about what we're doing tonight, okay? Because my goal here tonight is just a little mini teaching. In my brain, I'm thinking about this like an appetizer for you. This is not the full meal. And it's the same for your small group. Your small group is an appetizer for you. But I'm hoping that that leads you into deeper places in the Word. Because the real meal should be happening between you and the Lord. The real meal should be in spaces where you are going and you're hanging out with Him in the Word and you're letting Him speak into that. And so I would encourage you, if you're taking notes tonight, I have a bunch of other references. Yes, Ezekiel, yes, Jeremiah, but there are other ones too. We'll be in Exodus, we'll be in other places. Write those down as notes and go back later and take a look at some of those passages and get that full meal on your own. But the scripture that we're in tonight is where Jesus feeds 4,000 people with just a few scraps of food. And there are two moments in Jesus' ministry where he multiplies food. He talks about both of them in this Mark 8 passage. And one of them, he multiplies food for 5,000 people, and another one, it's 4,000, these different crowds. Why does Jesus do this twice? This very similar miracles, why does he do this twice? Well, some scholars think that based on the different locations, it was definitely different audiences. But some scholars think that when Jesus fed the 5,000, that it was a mostly Jewish audience that he was feeding at that time. And that when he fed the 4,000, that it was mostly a Gentile audience based on the locations. Regardless of why, we know that they're two different events because Jesus mentions them both in this text. So let me jump straight into that. I'm going to be reading out of the NLT. We're in Mark 8. I'm going to start in verse 1. Here we go. About this time, another large crowd had gathered, and the people ran out of food again. So Jesus called his disciples and told them, I feel sorry for these people. They've been here with me for 3 days. They have nothing left to eat. If I send them home hungry, they'll faint along the way, for some of them have come a long distance. His disciples replied, how are we supposed to find enough food to feed them out here in the wilderness? And Jesus asked, how much bread do you have? 7 loaves, they replied. So Jesus told all the people to sit down on the ground, and then he took the 7 loaves, thanked God for them, and broke them into pieces. He gave them to his disciples, who distributed the bread to the crowd. A few small fish were found too. So Jesus also blessed these and told the disciples to distribute them. They ate as much as they wanted. Afterward, the disciples picked up 7 large baskets of leftover food. Now, there were about 4,000 men in the crowd that day. Now, I want you to keep in mind they're only tallying men in that number, so we know that this probably is more like 10 or 12,000 people that just got fed. And Jesus sent them home after they had eaten. Immediately after this, he got into a boat with his disciples and crossed over to the region of Dalmanutha. Now, I'm going to jump ahead to verse 14 where the story continues because Jesus is talking right here. He talks with the Pharisees for just a moment, and then he jumps back. So verse 14, but the disciples had forgotten to bring any food. They had only 1 loaf of bread with them in the boat. So this is immediately following them feeding the 4,000, okay? And they get into the boat. They forgot to bring any food. They only have 1 loaf of bread. As they're crossing the lake, Jesus warned them, watch out. Beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and of Herod. At this, they began to argue with each other because they hadn't brought any bread. And Jesus knew what they were saying, so he said, why are you arguing about having no bread? Don't you know or understand even yet? Are your hearts too hard to take it in? You have eyes. Can't you see? You have ears. Can't you hear? Now that specific verse, those specific connections, you have eyes, can't you see? You have ears, can't you hear? That's the quotation we have. He's using language that the prophet Jeremiah used and that the prophet Ezekiel used, specifically Jeremiah 5:21 and Ezekiel 12:2. So hear Jesus' words. He just fed 4,000 men. Right after that, they get into a boat. The disciples are hungry again. They're starting to argue about food. And Jesus says, you have eyes, can't you see? You have ears, can't you hear? Don't you remember anything at all? When I fed the 5,000 with 5 loaves of bread, how many baskets of leftovers did you pick up afterward? 12, they said. I'm guessing they said that pretty sheepishly. And when I fed the 4,000 with 7 loaves, how many large baskets of leftovers did you pick up? 7, they said. Don't you understand yet? He asked them. Now, I really want you to get the scope of this in your head. Let's remember what the disciples have seen. They watched him feed over 5,000, which again is probably more like 15,000. And in that story, there is one kid with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. So Jesus takes that tiny offering and he multiplies it. So I want to think about this miracle of Jesus feeding these crowds from a couple of different angles. First, I want you to think about the one kid who did bring food. Think about that one kid. What does he have to give? What does he have to offer? He's standing there with something that is woefully inadequate. He has this tiny amount of food, and he's looking at a crowd of 15,000 people, and he's like, there's no way. What I have to offer won't meet the need. Listen, there may be times in your life that you feel like you cannot be used by God. It seems like the needs around you are too large, that you're too small, that your situation is too limited, that you don't have enough. Might I remind you that we serve a God who's really good at multiplying, and that it's not your job to do the multiplying. It's your job to just hand over the offering of what you have. It's God's job to do the multiplying. If you're so overwhelmed by the bigness of everything else that's happening there, of your problems, of your obstacle, then you've forgotten whose job it is to multiply. It's not yours. It's His. Now, if you don't think the math is on your side, if you think that it's up to you to multiply, then you might not be factoring in just how big and powerful our God is. Now, the moment in John 6 when it says that Jesus feeds the 5,000, Jesus gives an important reminder. Jesus makes sure in that moment, because they keep following him with this physical hunger, and he switches it to help them understand that there's a spiritual reality that's happening there, that they're spiritually hungry. Their physical hunger is a reminder of a spiritual hunger. And that's when Jesus says, you guys, I'm the bread of life. You eat this kind of bread and you'll be satisfied. You won't keep getting hungry over and over and over again. That's the one in John. If we jump back to Mark 8, now we've got the disciples. They're the ones who are getting hungry again. And what happens next in this shouldn't surprise us, because we get hungry too all the time. But what surprises me a little bit is the timing, right? I mean, they just watched Jesus do this miracle. They know that he can provide for people. They know that he can take care of them. And yet they're complaining about hunger in front of the God of the universe who can multiply food. But before I get too judgmental on the disciples in this moment, I want to remind you that this is very true of you and very true of me, and it's been true of people forever. Miracles fade. They fade quickly on us. This is a consistent truth through the Bible. In Exodus 16, the Hebrew people have just been rescued. They were slaves in Egypt, brutally treated by the Pharaoh, absolutely brutally treated. People worked to death and hurt and murdered by the Pharaoh. And God performs miracle after miracle after miracle to get them out of Egypt. And one of the final capping moments of them leaving Egypt is what? They crossed through the Red Sea on dry land, and every person in the nation of Israel, think about that, every person in the nation of Israel, every Hebrew person witnessed that miracle. They walked through on dry land. They watched the ocean close up behind them, the Red Sea. They watched that close up behind them and destroy Pharaoh's army. How long did it take for that miracle to fade? Like, that's a real question. How long did it take for the miracle to fade? The answer is 30 days. It took less than a month. Within less than a month, they had forgotten. Do you know why? Because they start getting hungry. Their bellies start rumbling. The moment that there was some physical suffering, they turned their eyes away from God And they said, literally, in Exodus 16:30, they said, it would have been better for us to die in Egypt than to be out here. Are you kidding? Don't they remember? Don't they remember how much God loves them, cares for them? He just rescued them. Have they forgotten? They haven't even asked him for food at this point. They're just saying, we'd rather be dead in Egypt than here. The disciples have just watched Jesus feed 4,000 people, but now their bellies are growling again, and suddenly the miracle starts to fade. Suddenly the object lesson isn't enough, and suddenly they've forgotten who they're sitting in the boat with. Can I remind you who they're in the boat with? They're in the boat with the person who said in Matthew 6, don't worry about your everyday life. Which of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? They're in the boat with the God of the universe who said, take care, or take heart, for I have overcome the world. That's John 16. They're in the boat with the God who said, my peace I give you. My peace I leave to you. I do not give as the world gives. Don't let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. That's John 14. Jesus is frustrated by their lack of faith. He's frustrated. He reaches back to the words of Ezekiel and Jeremiah to say, you have eyes, don't you see? You have ears, can't you hear? Don't you remember anything at all? And what does Jesus do in this moment? This is if you've been vegging out a little bit, which I get it, it's video, this happens sometimes, but if you've been vegging out, stay with me for this one part, because I want you to know what Jesus does in this moment with them. It's important, and I think it's necessary for us. It's so cool too, by the way, this passage, I think we picked this passage back in October or November. I didn't have any clue that this is what was coming at the time, but God's word has a way of being relevant in every space. And so I'm just blown away by how God knew that we needed this story this week. And he knew that obviously way before we do. One way that we can prevent miracles from fading is to remember where we have come from. Jesus does that with them, if you see that in this passage. He helps them dig back into their memory. He says, hey, how many baskets of leftovers did you pick up when I fed the 5,000? 12. How many basketfuls did you just pick up? 7. You see what he does? He helps them go back into their minds and remember where he was faithful, where God was faithful, where God did the miracle. Remembering God's faithfulness in the past builds our faith in the present. Did you hear that? Remembering God's faithfulness specifically in the past, going back to specific moments where God has been faithful in our past, builds our faith in the present. If you are feeling in this season like your faith is small, you're feeling confused, frightened, you're feeling that anxiety start to kick in, you're looking at bills that are due. Listen, I get it. What do you need according to this passage? You need to go back and look at the spaces God has been present in your life and where he has been with you all along, where he has worked and shown himself. In the moment, I get it. We are very grateful. But then suddenly the rent is due again, right? And in those moments we start to forget. Joe and I have walked through lots of seasons where we prayed desperate prayers over people who are sick. We prayed prayers for ourselves because we've had cars that have broken down, or like our finances are not in a good space. And it's like, and God has stepped through in those spaces time and time and time again. He's been so faithful. And I am so quick to forget that when the next thing happens and you feel that thing inside you start to clench a little bit. I get it. I'm right there with you. It's not easy. But Jesus encourages us to go back to those moments where God has been faithful and to lean into his character in those moments. We need to remind ourselves of his character, to remind ourselves of the ways that he's already been faithful. When we forget what God's done before, we lose our ability to see him and hear him and trust him. And hope and faith can't flourish in that space. Because the only thing you're paying attention to in that moment is how loud your stomach is growling, the physical pain of what's in front of you. We have to remember where we've been to have faith in where we are right now in the Lord. So based on that text, if you're struggling with worry or with anxiety, Jesus would tell you to go back and remember the moments where God has been present. Remember the seasons that he's brought you through already. Let God build your faith by remembering how faithful he's already been. I want you to sit down this week and I want you to remember the miracles, ones that you might not have even recognized where God was present in your life. Recall those emotions. I don't just mean in general, God, help me remember that you're big and that you were faithful. No, go back into specific moments and remember turning points in your life where you know God was in control, where he was steering you. That will be such a good space to bring you into having faith in this moment right now. Ask other people those questions. Okay, what turning points have existed in your life? Let them open up to you. You can learn some things about your friends by saying, give me a really difficult moment in your life and help me understand how you came through that. That's a question you could ask your parents, whether they're followers of Jesus or not. You can ask them, what have been big turning points in your life where you've had a difficult time trusting that things are going to be okay? That's a great conversation starter. So here's a challenge for you. We're currently in the season of Lent, right? And some of you know what that is, some of you don't, depending on your tradition. I know we have a lot of different traditions represented. But traditionally, what happens in a season of Lent is you give something up for 40 days, right? You give something away. You fast from something. I mean, sometimes it could be a type of food, or sometimes it could be an activity. But people will do that up until Easter Day. But our life has been so transformed by this pandemic that I'm gonna ask you to flip Lent just a little bit. Even if you haven't been participating in Lent, I'm gonna ask you to take something on. We have 2 weeks until Easter. It's not too late to get in on the Lenten season. And so I'm gonna ask you until Easter to take, instead of giving something up, there are a lot of things you've given up. So I'm gonna ask you to take a new discipline on. And in this, what we're talking about could be a discipline of gratitude. Becoming thankful for the spaces where God has been at work in your life before. But specifically this week, I want you to take on this discipline of sitting down with God and saying, where have you been faithful in my life? And help build my faith today. And do that with others. Bring them with you in that journey. Begin and end each day with prayer and gratitude. Find a time and place to be in the Word every day. Find a way to continue to be in each other's lives in meaningful ways. And so I'm going to say goodbye to you guys, but I am going to ask you to pull out your phone. I'm going to put some action points on the screen, and I just want you to take a pic of that with your phone so that you have those here for this week, and we'll just leave them on the screen for a little while. And I look forward to us joining the other campus ministries. As campus ministers, we're locking arms together, and we're lifting up the campus, and we're lifting up you guys, and I hope that you'll be praying for us and the campus leadership, and just hope and healing and peace. I think those are the big things that we're praying for in each other right now. So I want you to remember that you're loved. I want you to take heart. We can be connected with each other in this season. And God bless you guys in the corner that you're at. Learn how to be a giver in this season in your own context. Bye.